Welcome, everyone. I'm Joy Gothard. I'm the territory representative for Alongside Hope. And this is my buddy, my new buddy, Jet. And I'm going to let him pronounce his last name.
Takaoka.
Beautiful. Just a few housekeeping things. There is a washroom accessible to my left here, up the walkway, through the door, and then just turn around to another door. There is a karate group meeting there, so quietly close the door behind you. Yeah. I want to start with the land acknowledgement. We gather today on the traditional territory of Kamloops, Tishuquepmic, Kamloops, and area First Nations. We acknowledge their care for and working of the land prior to European contact. As Canadian Anglicans, we continue to work towards healing and reconciliation and a new experience of sharing the land together. I'm really pleased to see the turnout, and Jet and I thought it would be nice if we ask each of you to stand and introduce yourself to the others, and maybe name your connection to your parish, or how, if you are connected through your parish to Canada Foodgrains. So we'll start here with our latest edition. Christopher's also from Kamloops United. And we have Marcel operating our video. He's not going to turn it on. So I'm going to introduce Jed. Originally, he's from Halifax, Nova Scotia, and he's been in British Columbia representative for Canadian Foodgrains Bank since 2023. Jet came to BC to study at Trinity Western University Seminary, then went on to serve as a church planting pastor in Delta, but he has always been aware of inequity and injustice in our world. Since his tenure at the church, he has spent 25 years speaking on behalf of the world's most vulnerable people in the global south. Over that time, he has been donor relations, public engagement, and major gifts officer for 3 different organizations. Jet has traveled across Canada, speaking in churches, schools, service clubs, and with individuals. He has also traveled to more than a dozen countries, including Ethiopia, Zimbabwe, Cambodia, and the Philippines. He has seen firsthand the transformation that takes place when individual Canadians, as well as the Government of Canada, generously support others around the world to escape the cycle of poverty and to become self-sufficient. Jet says, all people deserve peace and stability. Everyone should have clean water, nutritious food, a decent livelihood, and their kids should have a school. No matter who we are or where we live, it's not too much to ask. It's God's call to all of us. It can be done. He and his wife, Joan, reside in the Fraser Valley, and they have 4 children. So welcome, Jet.
Well, good evening and thank you. It is so lovely to be with you on this beautiful spring, summer evening here in Kamloops at the Cathedral. So fun fact, I grew up in Halifax, which you just heard. The original St. Paul's is in Halifax, EST 1750, and they have worshipped continuously on that site ever since. So notwithstanding the colonial baggage that came with that enterprise, the Brits arrived and Lord Cornwallis staked out a parade square, and at one end sits City Hall, at the other end sits St. Paul's Anglican Church in Halifax, and it's one of my more favorite places, certainly in this country, if not in the world, so there's that connection. Okay, Anglicans, raise your hand again. Okay, okay, so we're in the majority here tonight. So, pop quiz, what year was Alongside Hope founded? 1945. You're warm. I think 1958. Why? And there's a Nova Scotia connection. The Spring Hill mining disaster. And Spring Hill, Nova Scotia, and I'm looking around the room and seeing people of a certain age here, renowned for what else besides the coal mine and the disaster in 1958? Yes. What uber famous Canadian? Anne Murray. Yes, indeed. Remember Sing Along Jubilee back in the day, and Anne Murray was on TV on CBC? Okay, a little walk down memory lane there. Anyway, thank you for having me here this evening and for joining us and wanting to hear a little bit about the Canadian Foodgrains Bank. And I will be referencing Alongside Hope somewhat, but I'm so thrilled. So let's see, we've got some Mennonite Presbyterians, if there be such a thing. They're here. They are here tonight. I heard the Alliance is here. Is that correct? You are members of the Canadian Foodgrains Bank, the United Church of Canada, the Lutherans. Am I missing who? United. So, yeah, this is a really good cross section. So, what is the Canadian Foodgrains Bank? The Canadian Foodgrains Bank was started back in the early 70s by prairie farmers, Manitoba, mostly Mennonite. And they realized, you know what, some years we have pretty good years. And sometimes there are places in the world where they just are having a very bad year. What if, like Joseph in the Prince of Egypt and the book of Genesis, we store grain when it is bountiful so we have something to share when it is needed. And thus was born the Mennonite Foodgrains Bank. And for a number of years operated under the auspices of Mennonite Central Committee. So our founding member is Mennonite Central Committee. And to this day, so farmers would get together, mark off a section or a quarter section, and Farmer Clausen would say, okay, this year I'll give up a quarter, and then all the other farmers around would pitch in, and they would lean on the suppliers for the inputs, and they would grow the grain, they would harvest it, and then they would store it. And back in the 1970s, you'll remember events like the Bangladesh famine of 1971 and 72. Soon after that, in 73, 74, with the collapse of the Haile Selassie regime in Ethiopia, there was famine there. And I believe our first shipments went out mid-70s, where we sent grain from the prairies to India. Now, fast forward, and today we still have some 220 growing projects across the country where farmers and producers get together and grow a crop, and they like to compete and line up like 48 combines and take the grain off or whatever they're growing in like 5 minutes, and then have a barbecue and celebrate. A bit of hyperbole in there, but not much hyperbole. And let me just give a nod. There is one such growing project here in BC. It is found up in Presbyteau. Anyone? Where's Presbyteau? Well, you don't get to answer. I know you know. Presbyteau is about an hour north of Fort St. John, and a wonderful gentleman by the name of Dr. John Wilms, Dr. John and Frances Wilms. He had this land up in the Peace Country, and he served with Mennonite Central Committee. And he was so moved by what he witnessed from his global travels that he determined that that land, as long as it was his to care for, what was grown there would be given to help provide food for those in need of food around the world. And that continues right up to this very day. And Dr. John is the uncle of the John Wilms sitting here in front of us tonight. So John's aunt is Frances Wilms, and indulge me my penchant for history, but she's a relative. I always get it. Was it Peter Dick or was it Clausen? Clausen's initials. FC. You know who I'm talking about. You do know who I'm talking about. So for the non-Mennonites, so I worked for 2.5 years at Mennonite Central Committee, so I actually learned some of this. Peter Dick was one fellow, and this gentleman named Clausen. And Mennonites in what became the Soviet Union, they were German speakers. So when the war was ending and the Soviets were reclaiming territory and claiming extra territory into Eastern Europe, that was a very bad time to be a German speaker. And F.C. Clausen and Peter Dick, I'm not being facetious or light-handed here as I say, they were like the Oskar Schindler of Mennonites at the end of World War II, getting Mennonites out of Eastern Europe into Canada. And John's aunt, Frances, was the niece, I believe, of one of those two gentlemen. I got to meet her before she passed away a few years. A few years ago. She was well advanced in years when I got to meet her while at MCC. And I said, so you're like Mennonite royalty? And she was like, well, I don't know about that. Anyway, I'm digressing, and I do that, so get used to it. And I've only taken about 6 minutes with this digression, so that's pretty good for me. So, Mennonite farmers, 70s, fast forward to 1983, and we realized, you know what if we get beyond our own, shall I say, tribe? What if we expand this and open this up? And thus was born the Canadian Foodgrains Bank, which very quickly expanded to become 15 member houses, as we call it, 15 Christian agencies working together. So you can see them listed there. I won't go through them all. Perhaps you see your most closely affiliated organization there. And we have a very simple mission and vision that we share. We work together to end global hunger. We envision a world without hunger. And our work is predicated on a couple of very simple beliefs. We believe them to be scriptural. Number one, all people, without exception, regardless of where you're born, when you're born, the color of your skin, your language, who you love, whatever your story is, you are created in God's image. You are an object of God's love and favor. This we believe very deeply and passionately. We also believe that God wants everybody to have enough food. And you read the book of Genesis, the entire creation order, you know what? There was enough then, and our third conviction is there is still enough in our world. There is enough resource for all to be fed. It's when the systems break down, and we'll touch on a couple of those breakdowns as we go along, that people end up going hungry. So that's a little of who we are. When we talk about food security, we're talking about having enough nutritious food on a consistent basis to live a healthy, active, productive life. It's a simple thing, really, if you dwell on it. So how do we go about doing this? You can categorize our work into three circles, if you will, three activity sets. I'll highlight them here, and then we'll dive into examples of each for the rest of our talk this evening. So first of all, we provide emergency food relief in times of crisis, such as I described just a moment ago. I would say this regarding that. Most of the crises in the world, when we think about food crises, usually they've been driven by climate-related events, climate disasters, and conflict. But right now, it's conflict. Of the 16 worst conflict zones in the world, and there's actually a categorization study institutes and study peace and conflict. There are ways these are categorized. There are like 8 regions in the red zone. There's another 8 in the orange zone. We're talking places like Yemen, Sudan, South Sudan, Eritrea, Gaza, of course, Democratic Republic of Congo, Haiti, and of the top 16, those two, the 8 and the 16, Foodgrains Bank members are now present and active in 14 of the 16 worst conflict zones in the world. So emergency food assistance in times of crisis. And then secondly, we want to get beyond crisis and get to self-sufficiency and self-sustaining, so long-term responses so that people can grow more and better food to sustain themselves and have a livelihood. We talk about agriculture and livelihoods, and those two things are intertwined. Ironically, most of the people in the world who are food insecure today, who are food stressed, believe it or not, are food producers. They overwhelmingly are small-scale farmers, subsistence farmers. And the third thing we do is what we're doing tonight, education and engagement with Canadians and advocacy with policymakers, with government to effect long-term change. So let me press on. I'm not here to brag, but we are gratified that Charity Intelligence, which evaluates thousands of Canadian charities each year, they don't always get it right. I do take issue with some of their methodologies, but for the last 7 years or so, they have recognized Canadian Foodgrains Bank as being a top 10 impact international charity. So we accept that with humility and gratitude that an external monitor looks and says, These guys spend a dollar well. And even more important than, I know we all ask the question, rightly so, well, how much, what's the administrative cost and what percentage? The bigger issue is, what is the impact of a dollar given? What are the outcomes? And I am biased, but I made a choice to come to Foodgrains Bank, and it is indeed a high impact organization. Just a quick snapshot. Now this slide is 1 year old. Our year just ended on March 31st, so we're just wrapping up some numbers and this will be updated, but you see a quick snapshot of the roughly $85 million received in fiscal 25. 74.5 million was spent. Bear in mind that some of that money comes late in the year and gets spent the following year. And we assisted over 1.1, nearly 1.2 million people in 37 countries. Let me just explain one thing, and I probably should have a slide that points this out. You need to envision the following. Picture Foodgrains Bank as being the umbrella. We're the unifying agency of the 15 members, each of whom has an account, an actual bank account at Foodgrains Bank, in addition to the shared resource account, the where most needed or general fund. And the members will work with their respective partners, so that's the third layer of this, on the ground in the 37 different countries around the world. So Foodgrains Bank ourselves, we don't execute on the program work. The members do so through their partners all around the globe. So the people doing the work are very close to the people receiving the help. They are all overwhelmingly local to the region where they are serving. So that's important to note. So let me go a bit deeper on a couple examples of the work. When we talk about emergency food relief in times of crisis, we have to recognize Sudan. Sudan right now is enduring the worst humanitarian crisis in the world. I was about to say it's been a slow burn, nothing slow about it. It's been an absolute conflagration for just over 3 years now. It gets very little mentioned in the news, and in part, I understand that there is so much happening in the world and so much that affects us here at home from global events that affect us more immediately. But here are some sobering facts about Sudan. Of a country of roughly 50 million people, 12 to 13 million have been displaced. Some internally, some have left the country to go to neighboring countries like South Sudan. And I want us to just sit with that for a moment and think about what conditions might be if you're seeing South Sudan as your preferred option, because South Sudan is not in good shape either. So 12 to 13 million displaced. The UN tells us that 33 of the 50 million people are in need of some level of food assistance or aid. And of those, I want to make sure I get my numbers right, it's somewhere on the order of 9 million are at the brink. These numbers are staggering. Like 12 million people, by the way, that's more than Greater Vancouver and the GTA, Toronto, combined, just for terms of reference. This is not the time or place to get into the details, and of course it all depends on where you get your information. But it is a conflict over power, it's a conflict over natural resources, and I would say this, that there are external actors with strong interests in keeping this conflict going. It's not a homegrown conflict at all, but it's the most vulnerable people who pay the price. Right there you see the gentleman down at the bottom. That's part of a nutrition program helping vulnerable people, especially children. As you see, one of our members active there, Development and Peace, Caritas Canada, that would be the Catholic agency. That is their partner, Trocare, it's called. Urdo is another organization, member house working there. That's Evangelical Relief and Development Overseas. That's the Pentecostal Assemblies of Canada. Let me just back up for a moment and say, as I ponder the ecumenicity of the Canadian Foodgrains Bank, and as you saw that little, all those different member houses, you don't have to think very long to think, boy, there's quite a spectrum there, as I call it, the socio-theological spectrum. But I think it truly is a testament to our Christian faith that we can get together and agree Christ instructs us to care for the poor, the vulnerable, the widow, the orphan, and the hungry. And I think that the fact that we are able to do so, it validates our message. It amplifies our message of Christ's call. Just a couple, I show you these photos from Sudan. Our executive director, Andy Harrington, was there 2 weeks ago, very deliberately on the anniversary of the breakout of hostility and violence and conflict mid-April. And we were actually able to get 19 different media interviews. CBC picked us up, and then a whole bunch of CBC regional affiliates picked us up. CTV picked us up, Global picked us up, and a few others. So we were really working to get the message out there that these millions of people are in need. These photos were taken during the visit. The one woman who's chosen to conceal her face, and we were very much on board just to respect her privacy and keep her identity to herself. Andy and another colleague were walking through an IDP, internally displaced persons camp, on the outskirts of Port Sudan. And this woman emerged, as is the custom in so many cultures. Guests were visiting from afar, so she came to offer food. And Andy talked about being quite uncomfortable, and it was quietly but firmly explained to Andy, this is hospitality, and he's a Brit. It would be very bad form, mate, not to accept the hospitality that is being offered. The young woman with the big smile on her face, and I wonder what I did with my glasses. Oh, there they are. My children laugh at me, and I don't know why. Nigel is her name. They've lost contact. She's about 20 years old. She cares for 5 younger siblings. Many of her possessions are in that frame. They don't know where the parents are, if they're still living. And yet this was her demeanor. And what we're trying to say here is the situation is dire. But these are not just people sitting in the dust with their empty bowl or their hands held out. These are humans with lives and love and dignity and joy and hospitality. They are us and we are them. There is no us and them. There's only we. And so I thought it important. Those photos are like 2 weeks old. So I wanted very much to share them as we think about the work to help people in Sudan. So that would be an example of emergency food relief as we provide basic staples, say a monthly food ration packet, lentils or beans, rice or maize, cooking oil, salt, perhaps a bit of sugar. It's pretty basic. But people over and over again express gratitude, thanks, and hope that, okay, now we don't have to worry about this month, so we can now think about the future a little bit. And so this is very much a huge part of what we do. You remember I alluded to long-term food security. Let me talk about this exciting initiative, Nature Plus or Nature Positive, nature-based solutions to long-term food security, building resilient food systems. And here it is. Here's a snapshot. So going back a few years, we identified 75,000 smallhold farming families in Ethiopia, Kenya, Zimbabwe, and Mozambique. And we set about to restore ecosystems, so landscapes that have been denuded of trees, overworked, an expanding population on a fixed land envelope, unsustainable practice, non-indigenous practice. Does this sound familiar to anyone? And how do we restore these, the land and the water and the ecosystem to improve practices, increase yields, and generate incomes? And there's a quick map of the 4 countries. Mozambique is immediately to the east of Zimbabwe, but I didn't want to put 2 red circles on there. So there are the countries mostly in Eastern Africa. So a big part of this, we talk about conservation agriculture, which in a nutshell, conservation agriculture, less tillage, so minimize the disturbance to the soil, maximize the ground cover, more ground cover, dry mulch, live mulch, compost. You want to preserve and protect, restore the nutrients and the moisture in the soil. Tied to that is tree planting, and then crop rotation and crop diversification, making sure that the crops grown are well suited to the land, to the conditions, to the nutrients available, which might be reintroducing crops that used to be more common before other methods of farming were introduced. So here's an example now tied to all that. So improved water management. And so where you have steep terrain or sloped terrain, when the rain comes, of course, and if the trees are gone and the practice has not been good, erosion keeps taking the topsoil and nutrients away. And it's as simple as cutting trenches across the face of the slope and letting the soil catch in the trenches, and then, packing it with stones or rocks to create a berm, growing some trees or shrub along the perimeters to hold everything in place. And you see some lovely befores and afters there. By the way, you see our little half moon things over there in the top right corner. Again, another version of the berm. So the turnaround is remarkable. It happens far faster than anyone imagined it might have. Natural soil regeneration and enrichment, planting, composting. So that is her compost, which is not exactly where I would often put my nose, but in terms of what it means to her productivity and the yields in her garden, which you see her tending there, this is transformational. So soil regeneration, also for communities that herd, livestock and range management. I actually took these 2 photos in Zimbabwe, where a community got together. While the cattle are individually owned, they got together to do communal management, and they talked about the conflicts that used to occur when someone's cattle would wander into someone else's garden patch, and how, one place would get overgrazed and trampled down. So rotational grazing, and they were actually doing a mini cattle drive for us while we were there. That map shows the entire community with all the topographical features and the streams and everything pertinent, and the plan that was in place as a community came together to improve their practice. This is what's exciting. So we launched this program 3 years ago. We're in our 4th and final year, but these are the early outcomes. Remember, I said we targeted 75,000 families. In fact, there were 78,000 full participating families. Moreover, there were another 45,000 indirect beneficiaries. And as I talked to my colleague Carol Thiessen, these Mennonites are everywhere, I tell you. So Carol Thiessen, she said, and in fact, Jet, there's a 3rd concentric ring outside that 45,000. The problem is we just don't really have the time, the personnel, the resources to really go and carry out thorough surveys. So we'd rather say we know they're there and we know there are a lot of them, but we'd rather just say nothing rather than embellish or be unsure of our facts. What we're sure of is well over 120,000 people have been helped just in the past 3 years through this initiative. A dramatic increase in household income. And $400 and change may not sound like a lot, unless, of course, you're a family making $2 a day to begin with. Then I assure you, it's a lot. We'll come back to that momentarily. One of my favorite stats is that bottom one. Nearly 18 million trees have been planted in 3 years with a 90% survival rate thus far. So this thing has really, really worked. It really has. So I'll say a little more about these two. Two different families represented here. You have John Makaya is the gentleman, and Chipo Mukute is that lovely young woman. They are supported, by the way, through an agency called Soro Trust, a partner of our very own Alongside Hope in Zimbabwe. They're in their community greenhouse. Those trees are for both produce as well as soil conservation and preservation. I'll say more about Farmer John in a second. Here's Chipo Mukute. She is standing in front of the Mushroom Hub. So that is a warm, dark, cabin-like structure and a co-op of 14 members, 12 women and 2 men banded together, and they learned about how you grow mushrooms. And for the sake of time, I won't get into the details, but it's more complicated than you think. But the mushrooms go with layers of compost into mesh bags, suspended in this warm, dark room, and they grow out, the mushrooms grow out through the mesh. And there you see some of the produce, it's not a fruit, it's a fungus, I guess, but mushrooms, which are sold and end up at retail markets in that region in Zimbabwe. And they had just had a couple of fits and starts. The co-op had been working together for close to a year, but they had just taken their first profitable harvest, paid all their costs, and each taken a dividend of $10 US a piece. Chipo Mukute is 45 years old. She is married. She is a mother of 5, and that was her testimonial. This is the first time I have brought money into my house. We did some back-of-the-envelope math with her and some of the others from the co-op, and we pretty realistically, perhaps optimistically, but realistically, they get this thing spooled up. So they're doing this 3, maybe even 4 times a year. Very, very realistic that they could be generating on the order of $50 to $60 a month each. I tell you, this is game-changing. This means you can afford to put a proper tin roof on your house, making it that much more weatherproof, and thus your health improves because you're not damp and cold all the time. It means children have shoes, books, and uniforms and go to school. It means when basic medicines are needed, they are affordable. It means there are choices at hand where there did not used to be choices at all. And this is transformation. And I cannot stress enough, this is the work that the communities do on their own behalf with a bit of support. And then they run with it. And it's so exciting to see. I want to point out another important facet to all this, and that is the critical role of women in all of the aforementioned. And I could be here a long time talking about the vulnerability of women around the world and the irony of this late middle-aged white male speaking on behalf of women of color around the world. I get it, but you're stuck with me. So what we know is women are amongst the most vulnerable in any given community. That is true here at home. That is more true many other parts of the world. And so we know that deliberately and strategically engaging all the members of the community transforms the entire community. And so these women are included. By the way, I won't get lost in this story, but this coming Sunday I'll be speaking at Trinity United Church in downtown Abbotsford, old downtown Abbotsford, and for Mother's Day we will be considering the book of Ruth in the Old Testament. That story is worth a read because it checks all the boxes. Vulnerable women in a famine who are widowed, who are dependent on the kindness of strangers in an agrarian, patriarchal societies. And by the way, it was the most unlikely of the women in the whole story that God in his sovereignty chooses to put in the messianic line. You got to read that story in time for Mother's Day and think about and read it through the lens of food security, because it's all over that little 4 short chaptered book. Okay, the sermon was for free tonight. Here endeth the lesson. You can say thanks be to God. These are a couple of United Church, ZCC, the Zimbabwe Council of Churches. If you look close, as you can see the UCC crest, both on the chevron on their shoulders as well as on the banner. And those 2 young women, Bianca and Rindai are their names. They are gender champions. So they are working specifically to the inclusion of women. And it was so exciting to hear men speak. By the way, I took that photo. I was in Zimbabwe just over 1 year ago to hear men in the communities explain the transformation of their understanding and thinking and way of being. And especially around things like domestic violence and gender-based violence. And perhaps not the most egregious expressions thereof, but violence is violence. And men explaining, well, sometimes, it's frustrating and things are challenging, but now I know if I'm having a problem or I have a disagreement with my wife, or if I'm just having a bad day, now I know I have supports right here in the community, and we can find other ways to deal with the tension of the moment. And to me, this goes to the creation order back in Genesis 1 and 2, if you think about it very long. So very, very important that women be at the center, not to the exclusion of men, not picking one side over the other, just saying this is a critical part of making sure the work is sustainable and effective. Let me talk about Farmer John, as we grew to affectionately call him, and Mushu Makaya. So there they are in front of one of their maize plots. If you look closely at the ground, you see that creeping vine going along the ground. That's cowpeas, that's a nitrogen fixer. And while it does compete for some of the moisture, it also protects the soil when the maize is first germinating from the hot sun bearing down. So you look at how lush that plot is. This is his other plot. This photo is taken just a few meters away the same afternoon, and that's his control plot. That's the way we always grew corn here, and that's what it looks like. Kind of sad, kind of spindly, sort of remember Joseph in Genesis? These are the skinny corns, not the fat corns. And this was literally the adjacent plot to that. So I can tell you with great confidence from personal experience, this nature-based solutions thing, it seems to be working. It really, really does. This is kind of fun. This is his sunflower field. So oil and silage and compost and a whole bunch of things. And perhaps his most favorite thing of all, especially when he found out the retail price of Canada. He was all over like, so how exactly do I get my honey imported to Canada for your prices? This is his apiary, and of his 20-odd beehives, he was harvesting 20 pounds twice a year, so roughly 40 pounds of honey a year per hive. And he was pretty proud. By the way, that grin he had in the photo there, and you couldn't wipe off his face the whole time he was there. He was just like, he was just so excited to show us what he was doing in his community. And he is what we call a lead farmer or a demonstration farmer, and they literally come from miles around to see the improved and sustainable and locally suitable growing techniques that are employed there in that community. So that would be an example of a long-term food security initiative. Third thing we do, and I'm going to park on this for a little bit, and we'll be winding down shortly, engagement and advocacy. I was privileged, about 4 weeks ago now, Minister Anita Anand, the Minister of Foreign Affairs, was giving a talk in Vancouver. It was kind of humorous. I'm going to brag a little bit. It's not really about me, but it kind of is. We've been trying to get it, by we I mean our executive director and our public policy director, been trying to get a meeting with the minister for like 2 years unsuccessfully. So I went to this event in Vancouver, and lo and behold, she stuck around afterward and said, "If I'll be here for a few minutes, if people want to say hi, come and say hi." So I did. So I'm talking to Andy, our executive director, and he says, "Yeah, I'm really busy today, mate. It was right before, I'm leaving for Sudan on Sunday, and I've just got, what's up?" I said, "So you might want to know I met with Anita Anand today." He said, "How did you do that?" I said, "I bought a ticket." It was that simple. Anyway, Anita Anand, our foreign minister, we do advocate for policy, especially around ODA. I'll say more about that, official development assistance. I want to comment on this. This is actually open for application, I believe, now for this year's cohort. Hunger on the Hill is this incredible opportunity. You apply through our website, and we put together a cohort of about 30 people, give or take. Maybe it's 20-something from across Canada. There's a couple weeks of online meetings and some reading and learnings and things about food security, the state of global food security and insecurity, food production, food systems, Canada's role in the world with regard to foreign aid or official development assistance. Then we convene in Ottawa on a weekend, and there's some in-person learnings that take place, and we talk about how government works and how do we lobby, how do we engage. And I know that lobby can leave a bad taste, but you know what? Believe it or not, our elected members, they take note of who's talking about what. They keep a literal score what the top topics are that's on the mind of their constituents. Moreover, they talk to each other. They talk to each other in the cafeteria. They talk to each other on airplanes. They talk to each other in committee. They yell at each other during question period, which is just bad theater. But a lot of the rest of the time, they're actually talking to each other, even across party lines. And I got to see that firsthand when I was at Hunger on the Hill a year and a half ago. So our voice matters far more than we realize. That's the point to all that. By the way, in that lower photo, we're in the office of Ed Fast, retired member from Abbotsford. Ed, the Mennonites again, Ed Fast. My goodness, you people are everywhere, I tell you. Ed was just a very, very fine member of Parliament, just a deep and thoughtful person, a person of faith, extraordinarily well-traveled. Photos on his wall with, you can see some of them on the wall there, photos of himself with Aung San Suu Kyi, with Premier Xi of China, with, I said, so what is one stand, and so Ed is now retired and he was winding down. I said, so Ed, as you think about the next chapters, you look back on this past chapter, give me a standout moment. And he spoke in the warmest of terms about the 10 minutes he had one-on-one on one occasion with President Barack Obama. And Ed, being a conservative, said, now, Ed, you're aware that President Obama was a Democrat, right? And he laughed and he said, you know what? If you can get rid of all the noise, we have so much more in common than if we just talk together. And may his tribe increase. Ed's a great guy. I've been alluding to official development assistance. And I have to say the wind is blowing in the wrong direction in this regard. If you go back a year and a little bit, this happened, and this is not a joke. If you don't recognize him, that man is Elon Musk. He was charged with reducing the cost of government. What he in fact did was literally and metaphorically take a chainsaw to what he did not know he was doing. When the world's most powerful man teams up, USAID, by the way, if you don't know, the United States Agency for International Development, up until last year accounted for 40% of global aid spending. 40%. Sit with that for a moment. So when the world's most powerful man teams up with the world's richest man to punch down on the world's most vulnerable people, I literally sat in the pew at St. Cuthbert's Parish and feeling pretty down about it all just over a year ago, opened the Pew Bible, as I was thinking about the service liturgy about to unfold. And wouldn't you know it, I don't usually believe in this kind of thing, but you know, I opened my Bible and put my finger. Well, my eyes landed on Isaiah chapter 10, which says, "Woe to those who make unjust laws, to those who issue oppressive decrees to deprive the poor of their rights. What will you do on the day of reckoning?" And that word woe, by the way, if you unpack it in its original context, it's not just, oh, woe. It means eternal damnation be upon you. That's what woe means. It's bad enough that that 40% is by and large gone, but it's not just one country. This is what's happened in the past year and a bit from the world's most generous countries, plural. So these are the percentage reductions in official development assistance to some of the world's neediest places. And why, you may ask, they're being forthright. This is so we can loosen up some money for rearmament. That's what's happening. So we are quite literally beating the plowshares back into swords at this moment. So as we talk about the work around the world in crisis zones, long-term food security, notwithstanding the great hope and optimism that is there, and it is. What I showed you, that's real time, that's current. There is good stuff happening. But it is also true, what are the words we use? I don't have them written down. At this time, when it comes to global assistance, global aid, the world's most vulnerable people in the world's most difficult places, we are overstretched, under-resourced, and under pressure. The wind is blowing the wrong direction. I'm going to measure my words because I get really animated. And every time one of these characters, I've used a different noun in other contexts, starts another war, such has been happening for the last, I've lost track now, what are we in week 10 or 11, give or take? So you're well aware of fuel prices. Maybe you've heard, maybe you haven't, something like 40-something% of the world's fertilizer passes through the Strait of Hormuz. None of that has moved since this debacle, and just countless other knock-on effects. So food inflation, which we feel here at home, and far too many families are far too stretched and stressed right here at home. We acknowledge that. But if we're talking about families that are spending 50, 60, or 70% of their income on the most basic of foodstuffs to begin with, and even more food inflation is piled on top of that, the situation becomes absolutely dire, and it really has. Some of my former colleagues from one of the agencies where I worked, he had just returned from Ethiopia. This conversation goes back over a month now. He said, yeah, we've had our truck in a lineup at the petrol station in the capital for a week because of fuel rationing in Ethiopia. And the fuel rationing kicked in Bangladesh, in the Philippines, in Cambodia, in Ethiopia, and elsewhere the first week of this conflict. So no one likes the cost of filling up a car around here, but the fact is we can fill up a car around here. Some places that's no longer an option, which if your livelihood is driving a tuk-tuk and you can't fill it up, that's a problem. If you're in India and you need the gas to cook, that's a problem. And so it goes, and so it goes. And the reason I get into all that, just so we understand, these ripple effects affect the world's most vulnerable, most immediately, and most severely. Let's talk about Canada, and we will be winding up. Okay, this is interactive, and there's a prize to be had. This is much coveted. Your very own, possibly, Canadian Foodgrains coffee mug, very sturdy. It is conditional, by the way. You have to display it in a prominent place in your household, in your kitchen, dining room, or mantle, or coffee table. How much, as a percentage of our national income, gross national income, so think percentages. In fact, I'll give you a dollar figure. It's about 12 or 13 billion dollars, which sounds like a lot. What is that in percentage terms, gross national income? Closest to the number gets a mug. 6%, 2%, half a percent, 0.1. Oh, now So I'm just going to play favorites here. We're going to go closest to the number without going over. 0.37% of our gross national income, or 37 cents. So the mug is yours. 37.5 cents per $100. So that's a fraction of what we spend on our military and less than 5% of what we spend on domestic social programs. So we are politically engaged at Foodgrains Bank. We are not politically aligned. I'm just putting some facts out. When on the campaign trail we hear it said, well, all this wasted foreign aid that props up dictators and terrorists and all that it could do here at home, the facts just don't bear that out. They just don't. Moreover, Canada retains a measure of prestige and trustworthiness that other countries, I'm not thinking of anyone in particular, have squandered. And so we would see this not just in altruistic or humanitarian terms. We see this very clear-eyed and very pragmatically. It's in Canada's interest to retain a leadership role. With the budget that came out a few weeks ago, what was announced was humanitarian aid will remain intact, but long-term assistance, development assistance, that's going to be cut by $2.7 billion over 4 years. And it does get messy trying to parse out what exactly we mean by that. But the fact is, we weren't spending a whole lot to begin with. We were at the low end of the scale compared to the other, the OECD, the Organization of Economically Developed Countries, the G20 we're sometimes called. We were near the bottom of that heap to begin with. Now we're going to sink just a bit lower. So pragmatically, here's something you could do even tonight if you wanted. We're inviting Canadians to lend your voice, and I just happen to have these postcards which say, hunger is preventable. You can read it so you see what we're calling for. Basically says, hey, let's not step into line with what so many other countries are doing. Let's chart our own path here. Your name and postal code in the top corner are very important, and a signature and date at the bottom is very important. And then no postage is required. It's going to the House of Commons to Randeep Sarai, is the Minister of State, Secretary of State for International Development, Member of Parliament for Surrey, adjacent to my riding in Delta. So I have some of those here tonight. You can sign them tonight. You can take a few. This is something we can do very tangibly and very immediately. We're at the end here, but we're asking our members, our friends, just caring Canadians generally. There are 4 things we ask us to do. And my guess is all of us can do at least one of these things. They speak for themselves. So I'm going to leave us with that. With this, thank you. This was another group of women from that same visit to Zimbabwe. And just the joy and the dignity and the fun of being with them as we celebrated food. They were making this huge meal for us, which was far more than we could eat, but it was a lot of fun to be there with them. From the people who want to do what they can for themselves, through me to us, thank you. So. I don't want to keep us late or long, but I don't know if this sparks any questions. Carmen, why am I not surprised? In the most positive of ways.
I just want to reiterate the advocacy part. This is so incredibly important. Every single person here received in their household a little update from RMP Mel Arnold. I don't know if any of you read it, but if you did, international development relief work is not a priority for him. There's 5 things on the one side of the page that are a priority, and it is in percentages, and it's 1% lower than whatever. I should have, it's probably in my car. But they only know that this is important if we tell them it's important. Write your MP, send the postcards. I have Canadian Lutheran World Relief postcards too in my car, right out there. But that is the only way that they know that this is important to Canadians. So if you do anything, do that. My little 2 cents.
And I don't want to belabor the point, and we can talk more after, even strategize offline outside this meeting, but a visit to your MP's office with a small delegation, especially if you go, interfaith or cross-denominational, that's a powerful thing. 3 of us went to see our MP in Delta, Jill McKnight, and she's in cabinet. She's Minister of Veterans Affairs. And it was, as Carmen says, and she kept saying over and over, but there's so many competing priorities. And we said, respectively, Minister, we understand that. And finally I said, a world where everyone has enough to eat, that's a stable world, and that's in everybody's interest. And she paused and she goes, well, that's true. So they do hear. They may not agree, but they hear it. So thank you, Carmen. A phone call, even a voicemail after hours, is worth a lot. The postcard, but this postcard goes to the minister, not to your MP. Your MP needs to hear from you, really and truly.
Thank you. I just want to say, Carmen, I recently heard one of our local politicians say he doesn't look at those postcards. He looks at the handwritten ones. So if you take a postcard, just write it out in your own handwriting or add a few words of your own. Thank you very much, Jed, for coming all this way, and you've given us a lot of food for thought and work to do. Ray has prepared some light refreshments that we're serving behind the altar here, so you're all welcome to come up and chat some more, network some more. Thank you very much.